this election is rigged are far from new. Through the campaign process, they have been raising questions. Violence has marred the campaign process. Several lives were lost in the last 3 weeks during campaigning, and today as well, at least 17 or 18 people have been reported dead. Opposition supporters were arrested and attacked. Even its candidates were facing harassment by the authorities. And this is not just claims by the opposition. Even foreign observers and human rights groups said that this was not a level playing field. The credibility of this election has definitely been drawn into question. DW itself over here has spoken to at least 2 voters who faced some kind of intimidation or harassment at the polls. They said that they were not able to cast their vote freely. One of them even said that his vote was already cast for him. He was not able to actually put down the stamp. Reporters saying that they witnessed ballot box stuffing.
Observers have raised fears over the future of democracy in Bangladesh following widespread allegations the country's national elections were rigged. Nimisha, so Bangladesh has a history of contested elections, but how angry are people about reports of irregularities after this latest election?
People are definitely angry, but more importantly, they are scared. Months of intimidation that observers have already stated that Bangladeshis have been facing. There has been a crackdown on free speech. The Digital Security Act that the government passed earlier cracks down on investigative journalism. So, of course, there is a climate over here where locals feel like even when they're angry, they cannot express it because the ruling party, the Awami League, led by Sheikh Hasina, is far too strong. Opposition party polling agents were notably absent, even inside the polling booths where representatives from all the parties are supposed to be there to help voters find their names. There were no representatives of the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which is a matter of concern.
Akbar, there is evidence of vote rigging.
Yes, it is. We have received numerous allegations of vote rigging, and many Bangladeshis they believe that these elections is anything but free, fair, and credible election. And I myself, visited some polling stations in Dhaka where I saw long queues outside, but there was no voter inside. And in some cases, we also found that there were long queues outside, but the voting centers, it was locked from inside, and voters were not allowed to enter inside the voting center in many places. And the opposition party, they say that this is a complete mockery to the democracy. And we have also received numerous allegations from across the country where many voters say that the voting took place actually overnight because they alleged that in some areas ballot boxes were filled even before the voting started the overnight. So the allegations are so spread that many people in Bangladesh, they think this election is far from any credible election.
Does the Election Commission have any power?
Election Commission actually served the interest of the government. The serious allegation is that in many parts of the country, the security forces helped the ruling party man to take control of the polling stations, and in some cases they also helped the ruling party man to rig the vote. Obviously, this is putting a big question mark over Sheikh Hasina's victory in Bangladesh's general election.
The elections have been marred by violence, accusations of a crackdown on opposition voices, and complaints of vote rigging.
Polls closed in this, the 11th election in this country's history since its independence in 1971, yet more allegations, predominantly by the opposition, of voter intimidation and potentially vote rigging. Members of an opposition polling station monitoring team say they had their IDs and election papers confiscated. They said they were threatened and ordered to leave.
Violence and accusations of voter fraud has also struck general elections over in Bangladesh. At least 17 people have been killed in clashes across the country. The election has been marred by allegations of human rights abuses by her government as well as vote rigging. There have been reports of ballot boxes being filled before polls actually opened. Bangladesh's opposition condemned what it called a farcical election and demanded a new vote.
Human rights organizations had raised questions and concerns about what Human Rights Watch, for example, called a repressive political atmosphere and a climate of fear, all connected to these concerns that you talked about human rights violations by the government, about repression, and about a clampdown on dissenting voices. Earlier in the year, we had the arrest of a well-known photographer, Shahidul Alam, who was incarcerated for many months. Only the latest activists said in actions that had raised worries among civil society at large in Bangladesh.
The Election Commission has been corrupted by the ruling party, and there is mounting evidence of voter fraud. Muhammad Ahsanullah Hassan is a member of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. He says his party polling station observers were arrested or prevented from entering by ruling party supporters. At least 10 people have been killed during election campaigning from both sides. This video shows what the opposition says was an attack by ruling party supporters on a group of opposition politicians, including the man leading the BNP alliance, while the party's leader, Khalida Zia, is in prison.
Clashes outside a polling centre in Dhaka. They spot a reporter and try to stop him from filming. It was just one of the many violent incidents in Bangladesh on election day. Others were more deadly.
I was a bit worried that my vote might have been stolen, but I didn't get to vote.
All the parties did not get equal opportunities to campaign. That is why I did not cast my vote.
In one part of Bangladesh, the BBC saw ballot boxes which had been filled even before polling began.
Supporters of the opposition parties said they weren't even able to vote because their voter registration numbers had gone missing.
How could the BNP possibly win? We weren't allowed to have any stalls. Our leaders are being arrested. Our voter registration numbers went missing.
The leader of the main opposition alliance has demanded another vote under a neutral administration.
The election was totally free, independent, no doubt about it.
But did it really play out that way? There were allegations of ballots being counted too quickly, polling booths closing for lunch breaks, and voting irregularities, all leading to doubts over the outcome of the election.
At least 17 people were killed in election-related violence.
And then there is Hasina's track record. She has long been accused of running an authoritarian government, accused of committing human rights abuses. This includes allegations of a wave of arrests of journalists, activists, and citizens.
Media hasn't had full and free access to the election coverage. We've had very little independent oversight and monitoring of the elections. Let's step back a little bit and see how the state machinery has been manipulated in Bangladesh for a period of time during the campaigning, the way the Election Commission has been manipulated, the way the police has been deployed. So instruments of the state have been used in the ruling party's favour.
Broadcaster and political commentator Ajmal Masroor is here in our studio. Ajmal, thank you very much for coming in. Soon before the polls opened, a foreign correspondent for a major international news corporation says they saw ballot boxes already stuffed. And it's already accepted amongst both the Awami League and the opposition that in some polling stations, there were only observers and members of the ruling Awami League. There were no other political representatives there. And yet, there are analysts saying that despite all of these allegations, these are only two of them, that the result wouldn't have been any different, despite all of these allegations. What do you make of that?
I think that's quite fictitious in terms of the way the results would have been any different. That's absolutely not true. A vast majority of people who wanted to vote, you would find from many polling stations, when they arrived at the station, they were told, sorry, the vote has been cast already. So actually who voted and who voted for who is already unclear. The fact that the polling stations were manned by, returning officers were from Awami League, volunteers were for Awami League, police as well as security services were watching all this corruption, indicates a wholesale corruption as well as what we call a stealing of the votes of the masses. So this election was a farce for sure. It was fake. Hasina had already made up her mind. We have documents from Bangladesh which gives clear evidence that Bangladeshi government was preparing to rig the election well before. In fact, Assam Times, a local newspaper, ran a sting operation 2 months before, and they were given bribe by Awami League so that they will publish fake news about BNP and Jamaat Islami to say that they're being supported by Pakistani intelligence services. So Awami League was absolutely at the forefront of corruption, at the forefront of rigging the election and making a farcical election just to rubber stamp its authority. This dictatorial regime needs to be changed. Otherwise, we're looking at a terrible time for Bangladesh and Bangladeshi people.
Where does it leave the opposition, though, this result, in terms of being able to counter Sheikh Hasina's policies? Because with so few seats in parliament, it almost seems as if this is a one-party state, at least for this term of the Awami League's rule.
But it's not only this term, it has been for the last 10 years. It's interesting you should say that. Robert Mugabe, the most despised dictator of our time, had never won so many seats. A landslide is not the word. She has 288 seats out of 299 seats in the parliament. That's all hers. She might as well could have called it 299. The biggest problem is, even before the election, the opposition party members were locked up, arbitrary arrests, people were disappeared, people were executed extrajudicially, people were fearful of their life. The government were running a reign of terror. They were subjugating any political opposition with iron fist. You know, the security services, police, even the army were colluding with the government because government had already sized them, lined them in their own pockets. And to say that political opposition would have been possible, absolutely not. Political parties from the opposition party did not even have a chance in hell or heaven to even compete in election. Remember, BNP's leader is in jail. And the international community should look at this, that this election was impossible for the opposition to stand and fight. If they didn't fight, then they would be accused of not fighting an election. And when they did take part, there was no space for them to compete or even canvass for their own votes.
The World Bank says between 2013 and 2017, Bangladesh's economy has grown by 7.5%. So what does she need to do now in this term to say to the people, you did the right thing to vote for me?
It's interesting that the world economy would say, or international observers would say, that Bangladesh's economy has grown, but to whose benefit? It's Awami League members, it's the government cronies and the corrupt, nepotistic regime that we have seen. It's their own friends that they've benefited from the growth in economy. And the worst thing is, would you know, Awami League's own leadership, many of them have taken the money out of Bangladesh and its coffers to places like London, New York, America, Australia to buy expensive houses. There are many investigations going on this issue at the moment. The biggest problem we have is Sheikh Hasina's own making. Extremism, militancy in Bangladesh. I believe that will proliferate. When you don't have democracy and freedom for people, alternative means and methods people apply to get themselves heard. And that is the biggest problem. The second or the third most populous Muslim country in the world, with great potential. My parents come from it. If you plant a seed on the ground, any seed will grow. It's so fertile. It's a beautiful country. But it's been ruled by corrupt crooks and criminals. Bangladeshis are better. So they need freedom completely. They need an independent election observed by independent monitors. They need international communities to demand Hasina's election to be cancelled and disallowed, a new election to be called. And most importantly, if Hasina doesn't listen, international community should put sanctions against her, her friends, and her party members across the globe.